My name is Carlos Lalimarmo. I work for SmartLogic, and I'm presenting a story. And I'll talk about what this means. So what is this presentation about? Well, the story is that I wanted to build an app that would be widely accessible and cheap to operate. I wanted something that I could use on my phone and my desktop, so web technology was like the natural answer. But I also wanted it to be cheap. Running server is expensive, or can be. So I decided I'd implement my app using JavaScript. Since by using JavaScript only rather than using like server-side implementation, I could host it just static files, and static file hosting is cheap. But my app wouldn't be very useful unless it could persist data, and for that I used local storage. So things were good for a while, and then I realized that local storage doesn't let me share data across devices. So local storage no longer suited my purposes. So like if this were an app for a client, I just say use Rails, and then let them pay for the infrastructure. But since I was paying for this app, paying to run it, I wanted to find a different way. So like Roku, Linode, EC2, these are the kinds of services you'd run a Rails app on, or any server-side application, and they can be expensive. Okay, I think I'm paying like $400 for 2 years of Linode, and this is, I think, their smallest instance, like their smallest server size, but that's a lot of money. Whoa. Where am I going? So I thought, why not use the same thing that I use to host the JavaScript on, like S3 or Google Cloud Storage. And I was confident I could get it to work because I was already running without a server, right? I was using local storage to persist data, and it's basically like it's basically the same, except that with S3 or Google Cloud Storage, I could get to the data from any device. So I wrote a toy application, and it worked, but a few things gave me some trouble. So the first thing was like I didn't have like a REST API, no relational database, and these were challenges that I had faced before in using local storage. As a web developer, thinking about data in these terms becomes second nature. So like designing the data structures took a little bit of extra effort. So for example, efficient updates in a collection of entities, like consider CRUD with a REST database, or a REST interface and a database. It's pretty straightforward to update like one thing in a collection, because the database gives you an ID, and you can use that ID to like get an entity and then make changes to it. But without that, you have to design a data structure that lets you do that. So in order to find entities quickly, I can use like a key value structure. But to use a key value structure, I need to figure out what keys I need. So that's like extra overhead, extra thought that I have to put into this application. Resource contention. This was not something that I ran into because I'm the only person using this app, but like it's a concern because like since we're using an object storage API, if multiple users or multiple clients have access to the same object, write access in particular, there's the potential that write operations are clobbering each other. So that's something to think about if you're going to try this out. Authentication and access control. I used Google Cloud Storage for my data persistence. I didn't use S3, so I'm not sure like what the details are as far as that goes. But in order to access objects, I need to authenticate with Google. I used OAuth2 to get a token, and then the buckets and objects have ACLs, or access control lists. That all has to be configured properly. It's kind of fiddly and tedious. This probably took the longest time to get working, actually. And it's kind of boring, so I'm gonna skip over the details. Sorry. Cores, right? So since the front-end JavaScript is making requests directly to Google Cloud Storage, it looks like the request is coming from localhost or whatever. So you need to configure your buckets to allow CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. You have to configure your buckets to allow that. Since the requests aren't coming from like a known server, as they would if you had implemented like a server to make requests to S3 or Google Cloud Storage. That was also kind of tedious. So I'm sure by now you're excited to try this. Seems easy, right? Given the constraints of the architecture, especially resource contention, this is not a good fit for every type of application, but there are a few that I think it will work well for. Document editors. Object stores are really good at storing files or documents, so this makes sense. As long as only one person is able to write to a particular file, then resource contention shouldn't be a problem. So like if you have files that you want to just get at from any device, this could work out well. And this is the class of application that I originally had. Document publishers, you might be able to implement a blog this way, or like a to-do list or something. And then other people would be able to see it, but like they wouldn't be able to change it. So again, resource contention is not an issue. I think you could do recommendation engines with this, actually. Simple recommendation engines. So your object storage would like hold such things as user preferences or attributes, what kinds of things they like, and then candidates, the things that you would recommend to them. And then in the JavaScript, you'd combine the two and provide recommendations. You wouldn't be able to do things like aggregation, I think, just because you'd have to load everyone's information into the front end, which could be problematic depending on your scale, your data scale. Yeah. So this is a dependency diagram for the toy example. The blue dotted line on the right is sort of the front end, back end division. At the far left, you have like UI classes, something called a log view, and something to choose files. The log view depends on coffee logger. It's the business logic, and that depends in turn on the file, which is like an abstraction for like opening new files, saving data, switching between them. The file depends on the data store. That's what integrates with Google Cloud Storage, and then the data store depends on an authenticator to provide the OAuth2 tokens that I need to get at the buckets. And in case you couldn't imagine what that looks like. Actually, let's see.
So is this the app that you created?
Yeah, this is the toy app. Right now there's no file. And this is data that came from Google Cloud Storage. I can look at it. I can add records. Oops. And this was the worst cup of coffee ever. I can open a new file. And it's empty. I can switch between them. Oops. It's a little bit buggy. And I can show you in the developer console, I can prove to you that, oh, I had it up. That's actually stored on Google Cloud Storage. Crap. Where did... the code for that, I won't get too much into it, but so there's all that's here is like an index file.
Can you make it a bit bigger, please?
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
So this is the index file. This is what you get when you visit baristapro.shapenav.com. We use require.js to load a main JavaScript entry point. And then this just sets up that dependency hierarchy. We authenticate. When we authenticate, then we initialize the application. Then that instantiates our views, which then depends on everything else as I showed you before. So does anyone have any questions? I think that was the last slide.
I have a question. Sure. I thought I saw a snippet of what looked like a code, like an authentication token or something in the bottom of the main JS source code. Mm-hmm. How do you provide the client-side application without giving away any secret that would let me authenticate to? Like if I could pull in your code and use that token to authenticate to your bucket on Google Cloud Storage.
So the bucket, how do I answer this? The bucket has an access control list, which I could probably show you what that looks like. If I could figure out how to pull up.
That was a bucket ID in the source code?
Sorry, maybe I'm thinking about the wrong thing.
So there's no private, you can do it without private information in the code.
Oh, there. So you're talking about this?
Yeah.
Client ID?
Yeah.
So the client ID just, that identifies, like, for quota purposes, I think, what is accessing the bucket. Who can access the bucket is determined by an access control list. So when you authenticate, like, the app first asks for your permission. Like, this app wants to access Google Cloud Storage and wants to know what your email address is.
Can you go incognito and show us?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So I think it should ask me to sign in.
You typed in the wrong password.
Sure.
Anticlimactic.
And I guess I've already granted it permission. But so now that it knows who I am, the bucket configuration
So you
will
should
let
have
me
that pulled in.
access it.
So it's really because Google is providing the client-side authentication library, right? Like you couldn't do that with like any direct, like any data on the web anywhere, right? With authentication, it's because Google Cloud Storage has authentication built in.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
this versapro.shapenet.com, where is that hosted? On GCS?
That's hosted on Amazon, actually. Google Cloud Storage static site hosting was kind of weird. Like I wasn't able to get it to work.
So you can put it anywhere on the web. It's just that you're accessing something that requires you are authenticated to ACL.
Yeah. I think, if I understand your question
So
correctly.
your static files are in an S3 bucket
Mm-hmm.
with DNS pointed at them.
Yes.
They load up, and then the browser code OAuths to Google Cloud Storage so they can read and write those files.
Yeah.
So then any OAuth tokens are session local in the browser only.
Can you repeat that?
And any OAuth tokens that you get through that sign-in loop are local to the browser instance.
Yes. Yeah. Brian?
There's technology that can be written to make this easier for other people. Like, are there other steps that can be framework of 5 to make?
Yeah, actually. So.
Unless you think people would pay for follow-up questions.
So I guess if I pull up the diagram. Oh, that's what the heck. This diagram. So these two layers I factored out into JavaScript library. So JSON GCS and the authenticator too, also Google OAuth.
Cool.
Those are both JavaScript libraries that I have provided.